Okay, so first off, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Kame Abraham. I'm a fashion journalist and researcher from London College of Fashion. And I'd like to first of all thank everyone here for joining our talk on fashion activism for the Fashion Minority Alliance Festival. So let's go around and introduce ourselves, just a little 15 seconds. And I guess we'll start with Karen.
Um, Thank you, and thanks for inviting us to talk, and hello to everyone. My name is Karen Franklin. I've worked in fashion and identity culture for 40 years. I began in the 80s working at ID magazine and moved uh, overground to the BBC, where I began to have much broader picture of the way in which fashion impacted on people's sense of self. But also I've seen from the beginning really the democratization of fashion, which at first offered more achievable price entry points for people who wanted to prioritize good design. But then I've seen it move through to obviously the space of exploitation and overproduction and waste. My position is always that we have to have emotional sustainability as well as material and resourcing sustainability, because a sick workforce or a psychologically undermined individual can't put the fight in the way that we all need to.
Wonderful, thank you. And I will go next to Marielle Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Marielle, and I have worked in fashion in the last 8 years. I work as a writer and a photographer. I am a contract writer for Vogue, and I specifically look at exploring the intersections between size inclusivity and ethical and sustainable fashion. I'm extremely passionate about ethical and sustainable fashion, but as a fat person that wears a size 22, 24 in US sizing, I am very aware of the limitations for individuals that are both passionate about ethical fashion but also need larger sizes. And so I work in the advocacy of that. I work to help connect fat people, plus size people with plus size ethical designers. And then on the back end, I also work with designers as a consultant doing fit testing and helping give feedback on marketing and wording to call more into ethical, sustainable fashion as a movement, because it doesn't matter how much you care about it if the clothes don't exist.
So hello, everyone, and thank you for having us here. My name is Dan Pontaglier, and I'm a consultant for sustainability in the fashion and hospitality industries. My main goal actually is to guide companies in order to be more sustainable and to be accountable for their actions, not just in operation, but in the whole chain of production of their products or services. And well, besides that, I'm not just activist for fashion, but also for LGBTQIA+. Sorry, but I manage many languages, and when I have to do the wording, sometimes it's complicated. And what I try also is to approach sustainable fashion towards that community too, because likes and dislikes are sometimes different, and the availability of products that we have in the community compared to the heteronormative community, it's quite different, unfortunately. So that's what I'm trying to focus my work on also.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dan. And then last but not least, Marcellus L. Jones.
Hi, I'm Professor Marcellus L. Jones. For the last several years, I've really been concentrating most of my fashion efforts in working with projects with the European Commission. I lobbied the European Commission with our partners throughout the European Union, plus other countries such as Serbia, Montenegro, in order to get funding to develop their fashion industry sectors. I'm a long-term professional in the industry with 20 years behind me. I created a fashion magazine, which was quite popular in the early 2000s, online magazine. Um, I co-founded, which has now grown into being the fifth largest fashion week in Europe. It's called the Serbia Fashion Week, and only the fashion weeks in Paris, London, Milan, and Madrid are bigger than that fashion week to date. And before that, that led me up to that point. Um, I originally started out my career as a scout for some of the leading modeling agencies in the world and became a stylist. And then I went on to become a fashion critic. And before I created my television show, I became the first Black man in the world to host an internationally television program exclusively dedicated to global menswear, and to have that program broadcast weekly for nearly a decade. And we had the biggest names in fashion, from Karl Lagerfeld to Lacroix, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Donatella Versace, as well as the world's biggest stars coming on board to talk about their points of view on fashion, from Janet Jackson, Mila Jovovich, Kylie Minogue, pretty much every celebrity you can name, they were on my show.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Marcellus. And everyone here, you guys have a very diverse point of view in fashion, as well as your point of views of how you want to approach fashion activism. So, for each of you, how do you approach your version of fashion activism? Uh, Anyone could talk first if you if you like. See, I guess like the
Well,
first.
in terms of
Go ahead,
me,
Marcellus.
Well, in terms of me, the first part came in terms of representation, I'll say. When I began my career, and particularly in television, uh, there was a particular look that the networks wanted to have in terms of people who could speak about fashion. And I can promise you, I did not look anything like the type of individual that the networks were looking for. And so I had to fight, and I created my own television show, and I got my own producers and broadcasters. And I had some amazing partners. But one of the things that I did realize in the work that we were doing was that, my company has always been about creating opportunities and putting opportunities in the hands of young people who didn't necessarily come from a family that could just pick up the telephone and call and give their kid a top intern at Vogue or at Harper's Bazaar or at Saks Fifth Avenue. So I wanted to have a program that were able to provide opportunities and provide training. The difficulty that I found when we started in terms of the part of diversity, when I came along, the only people that had important positions that you could visibly see at the important fashion weeks and the top shows in Paris, like at Chanel and Jean Paul Gaultier and Givenchy and all of those, they were Constance White at the time, who was the fashion editor at the New York Times. Of course, you could see Andre Leon Talley, and then there was Jay Alexander. And when I was coming up the ranks, they were like gods. And then as I started to develop my own company and make my own name in the industry, I realized that when we would go to get interns, just a simple example, when we went to get interns and say we want to provide training, I realized that all of the interns pretty much had the same physical profile. And then I contacted the school, and one of the schools that we were working with, and I said, well, I noticed that you're doing selections of the candidates that you're sending to us to work with. And they've been great students, but I've noticed that they've all looked the same and none of them look like me. And when I asked them flat out, do you have people of color in your program? And they were like, yes. And I said, well, can you tell me, we've been working together for 2.5 years, but you've never sent to me not a single CV of anyone, that looked like me, or who was Asian, or who was of North African origin. And I had to tell them, listen, if you don't make an effort to send me more diverse candidates, then I'm going to have to rethink our partnership. And from that moment on, they started sending me a diverse range of qualified candidates. So that was the first step that I had to take. And it just went on from ever in more and more. But the one thing that I personally did for myself, in order to assure that there was always an opening an opening of minds for someone to have a seat at the table or to be even invited into the room, was to make sure that no matter what I did, I always tried to make sure that I was the very best at what I did. And so I always made it a habit to know more than anyone else in the room, or know just as much as the designer about what they were doing, about their work, et cetera, et cetera. And
Right.
so when people start to make that association, they start to open up their minds little by little and say, oh, hi, well, maybe this particular person is not just a fluke, and maybe, we should start thinking more about these things. So that was my way of doing it.
That's a very interesting point, especially what you were saying about you didn't see anyone that looked like you in these, influential positions. And as all of you are in influential positions, do any of you resonate with that, where you want to, give opportunities to people who, may not be the common physicality or personality or, things like that. So
Completely.
oh yeah.
I completely agree with him in what he said. Not just because of that, but I know it's not the same, but being Spanish and living abroad also, I'm an immigrant, and being from a community which is a minority and it's been criticized for so long, I can identify some points. For example, now owning my own company in the hospitality industry, have the European Sustainable Hospitality Club. I do myself the interviews also for staff and for interns. And whenever I do the interview, for example, for a person that lives in Barcelona, which is my hometown, in fact, I will always look for a person that it's an immigrant there, because the perspective that they have, it's wider. I mean, that's what I see, and it's my point of view. And not just that, like Marcelo said, it's not just represented enough. So it's I think it's on being white. I think it's on my duty to do stuff like this. Also, it's not only duty for BIPOC people to care about this community or minority. I'm a minority too, so obviously we need to care about each other. So as well as BIPOC person shouldn't be homophobic, and an homosexual person shouldn't be racist. It's all, it's, for me, it's all connected. So I believe in that. And for also the positive part that you have behind that, it's what I said at the beginning. The mind is more open. They have more expertise. They've lived in different cultures. So the capacity of absorption and comprehension, it's greater. So it's a plus.
Yeah, I love that. And then for Marielle, I guess I'll swing back to the first question. So for you, because you said you're very involved in ethical and sustainability, as well as body positivity and inclusivity. So how do you approach your version of fashion activism?
Well, I think a lot of my fashion activism has been really rooted in trying to help the everyday consumer feel wanted by the ethical and sustainable fashion movement. I think, especially in the last, about 10 years ago, really, ethical fashion was starting to get more traction in North America, where I live, and it has been predominantly demonstrated and given space for thin, white, cis people, usually of privilege. And the ethical and sustainable fashion movement has become increasingly a marker of privilege, of being able to have the means to afford to pay other people a living wage. And so one of the biggest goals for me has been trying to open up who sees themselves in ethical and sustainable fashion, and how we even talk about it, trying to meet people where they're at, whether that's from financial restrictions, gender restrictions, the challenges of being plus size or needing different sizes, of being a disabled person in some capacity and needing different things from your clothing to support your body. And so for me, I'm really interested in connecting the consumer with ethical and sustainable brands that will work for them, or with concepts from slow fashion that will work from them, even if they're never able to afford to buy ethically made clothing. So I think for me, my passion and my activism has been very much so focused on how do we expand who sees themselves and feels wanted in this movement, and how do we make it so if someone is interested in ethical or sustainable fashion, they have the access and there are as little barriers as possible for them to participate. because I think that the more narrow we define ethical and sustainable fashion, the more barriers we put in place to make joining the fashion revolution possible, the harder it will be for it to become mainstream and to be something that collectively all of us are pushing for, which if we look at what the fashion industry needs is, government regulation. We need more supports to continue to drive forward a sustainable fashion industry. And we can't do that if only, 2% of the population can participate. And so for me, it's very much been about how do we expand who sees themselves as being integral to this movement, and how do we democratize as much of the information and resources we have to inspire people to feel like it's not this impossible thing that they have to participate in, and it's not something that they aren't wanted in. How do we get people to this place where they feel like everyone has the ability to participate in slow fashion? And so for me, that's been, a really, really big part of the work I do. And I have done that work, on Patreon, on Instagram, and now as a pretty frequent contract writer for Vogue, talking about plus size individuals and highlighting plus size fashion, especially plus size fashion that is also being sustainably produced.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing. I find that really interesting. You saying it, democratizing fashion as well as finding people who see themselves in it. I guess lastly for Karen, because I know that for your work, you also work in inclusivity and diversity. And I just want you to, share how you approach, your fashion activism work.
Well, what's been fantastic is hearing everybody talk about, current practice and sort of starting in the 80s. We didn't have the opportunity for the same sort of social networking or there wasn't the vocabulary or the knowledge that we have now. So I would say I worked back then, but I still work on gut instinct. This doesn't feel right. Why doesn't it feel right? I was really fortunate as a journalist to be able to move into fashion programming like Marcellus, and to have a platform like the BBC. We went out for 12 years, and we had a 13 million audience every week. And of course, we didn't have feedback from social networking, but people would come up in the street and talk to me about things that bothered them. It was, for me, very easy and clear to move towards challenging the unachievable body ideals that the fashion industry promoted, the tall, thin, white model, to make sure, bring in that when I started, all three presenters were Caucasian, so we didn't have a person of color or any sort of diverse voice also representing identity conversations. I found it thrilling to be invited into those environments to promote people who were bringing a different perspective, but I also did campaign for us to have, another presenter. I've sort of taken that approach and always stepped into the room and looked for who isn't being represented or who is being undermined. So it was very easy as well to move into that space. I kind of said at the beginning that we first saw the diffusion lines and the stores working with designers to bring a better price point for people who had seen it on the telly but couldn't access it. First saw that as really liberating, but then following that through with reports and visiting garment industry as worker environments, and taking that news back to people who were in a position to, that we're all in a position to educate, was another way of doing things. But I'm just going to pick up on something that I said at the beginning, which is, to me, and again, Marcellus, you've sort of, in fact, everybody's flagged this up, is that when we don't have enough voices at the table, when we're sort of undermining and muting and silencing people who bring problem solving and solutioneering to the conversation, then we cannot expect to find these quick fix ideas for the way forward. And I think is one of the biggest criticisms I would make, is that the big brands are unable to kind of there's a myopic view about it's still about the quarterly profit returns. It's still about the promoting like for like, but putting some fine words on their company sort of website or declaration. And that, so we fast forward to, so we have 15 years now of social networking, that this is the space where we become citizen participants, as opposed to isolated consumers, that we actually are all able to educate each other and move forward. I have done some of my best learning on Instagram and on social networking because people have talked about their lived experience. And I wouldn't have had that chance to do that. I feel positive that we are speeding up in such a way that people now are able to access information and sidestep the company line, because somebody has an inside view and somebody knows how to work it. Marielle, for instance, I loved on your website the research that you had done to create the sustainable list for a much broader spectrum of sizes. That I'm always keeping little lists of if I need to recommend something, but you just did all the work for me, which is fantastic. And that's the joy of the connectivity that we have. So I do feel excited and positive, even though we all acknowledge that, there's a lot to do.
Yes,
You know,
that's
I wanted to say something about what Karine just said, if that's okay. Karine, for me, for what I have pretty much noticed in the industry, yes, of course, there was to some extent some silencing of voices. But for me, the biggest part that I really encounter and that I noticed in my own observations is the fact that in order for a voice to be silenced, the voice first has to be even recognized. And that was the original sin of the industry, that that people were not even recognized or given the chance in order for them to end up getting ignored in the end. Now now tokenism, when we put people in places just to say we have one here or there, and I do have friends that worked in the industry and stuff, that were put in places as a symbol, right? In order to say, well, we have someone here, and those individuals were, silenced in the end. But for the most part, I think the biggest problem is that we saw people who were never even given a chance to show what they could do. And I want to say this goes beyond, this really goes beyond a color thing. And I think is when we talk about like color, I think color or ethnicity is emblematic of the problem, right? But I think the problem goes far beyond a simple color and stuff, because it's like when we look at y- fashion is about making money as well. It's particularly since the late 90s and late 80s and early 90s when we started having a bunch of fashion houses being taken over by financial advisors and venture capitalists, right? So money is what they hear, money is what they smell, money is what they understand, and all the creativity has kind of been sidelined. But today what we have found is this: I am an investor in the corporate world, and I'm very glad of that. Uh, but what I do want people to understand is diversity is the way of the future, because you cannot have small pockets of people who've never lived certain experiences making decisions and trying to decide, well, this will work in this community, or this group of people will like that. And what corporate America has discovered, for example, is that when they have started to implement more diversity and having more of a plurality different people with different experiences, they have found that the bottom line absolutely shoots up. So companies that do incorporate diversity, they are benefiting from from the bottom line here about how much they're making on a quarterly or annual term. So whatever the means are for the communications, perhaps we need to put more emphasis on that for those companies that are more profit oriented, more so than talking about making society in the world a better place. I don't know. What do you guys think about that, Karim?
I just wanted to say something. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead,
Sorry.
Dan, please.
Relating to what Marcelo just said, and I totally agree with that. I started in fashion, like designing 5 years ago, because it wasn't accessible for me when I was 18, and I really wanted to study fashion and study art direction. For example, I had to go to tourism, take the lead on the 6 languages that I speak to be able to make money on that industry, to arrive to my age and be able to pay the studies for fashion. So when you're coming from a really low income background, it's very complicated to have, not just to have a voice, but just to access. It was something that it was impossible for me in that moment. I had to work from 8 in the morning to 4, then go to class, and then go to a bar to work more to be able to pay only the studies for tourism, which was crazy expensive already in Barcelona, in a place where the minimum wage is 600 euros and you're paying 700 for a house. Well, that not now, but in the moment when I was living there. So we really need to take that into consideration. And this is something that I didn't mention when I was talking about my procedure or following when I hire someone. I try to do that people that it's coming from a background where I'm coming from, because I know how difficult it is to be able to access even to an internship position or even to a business school if you want to study something that you want. So just thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah. And if I may, I'd like to totally agree with Marcellus that actually the more we put studies out there, certainly the understanding that when you are dealing with diverse perspectives, your brain is operating differently. So you're encouraged to think outside of the box. And all of the business studies that show enhanced efficacy, productivity, and sort of customer interaction are vital for us to big up. I think there was a really brilliant one done in 2007 by Dr. Ben Barry, who is Canadian. And it was a really large study that I thought the fashion industry would just sit up and be wowed by. 3,000 cross-cultural participants who, when they were shown a range of fashion images, looked to make a bond through the shared characteristics of that model. And when they did that, they showed an increased intention to purchase by up to 300%. You'd think that would be the sort of lead kind of line for a lot of brands, that we've talked about body difference, appearance difference, and representing a range of identities, that every brand would understand that. And of course, to all the points we're agreeing on, is that it's not just about that diversity in front of the lens, but it's about it being behind the lens in the senior leadership team, in order for that to be, because I've been in the industry long enough to see that there have been these kind of rises and moments, and for a while back there, they were talking about diversity as though it was a moment or it was a trend. And so fashion does do that. And a key thing, as to your points, is for there to be a rise of people into leadership, being able to take those decisions because they represent lived experience of a broader range of interactors with fashion.
That you actually made a really interesting point, along with what you were saying about, social brands, especially on social media, being on trend of, diversity, sustainability, or any type of social cause. And I actually wanted to ask all of you, so because all these brands are now starting to, start discussing about, sustainability, diversity, inclusion, what have you, consumers are starting to may not see it as sincere, or may see it as, like what Karen said, is, like on trend or of the moment. So how do you think brands could, sincerely talk about these causes, or be come across more genuine to consumers without seeming performative?
So,
Okay,
so I think for me, one of the biggest things is just having people that have those lived experiences and have those identities in positions of power. And I think that until those people are making decisions or being consulted or given opportunity to vet any sort of marketing, I think that brands will always run the risk of it looking opportunistic instead of genuine, because it is opportunistic and not genuine, because I don't think that you can enter these spaces without having that past experience to be able to talk to those communities ethically.
Well, I want to agree. I agree on that, and I want to incorporate something else, that it's that unless companies they start to add in their balance, in their benefits and profit balance and everything, their impact in society, environment, economy, culture, etc., what they're performing their operations and everything, it's going to be quite often impossible to not have fake marketing messages, let's say. Even though sometimes when we are let's say leaders, something might escape, we can fix it, obviously, but sometimes communications it's difficult to handle, not just because of that, but because we are not following a green economy model, let's say, where we really take into considerations the impact that we are having, as I said before, in the different spheres of sustainability. And obviously this is impacting negatively, not just to consumers, but also to other brands to be able to show their messages without even caring, and just greenwashing what they do, and the real actions that they do, if they don't have a commitment behind. Something that we have to teach consumers, something that we have to teach people that buy things, is to ask for long-term sustainability commitment of the brand. We have to see that they are actually doing something forward, not just like, okay, I did some operations in my office, so nobody uses paper, just an iPad, and that's all. No, we need to go further on it. It takes into consideration your chain, who you are working with, all the stakeholders. So we need to take accountability on that, also. And another thing is that there is a lot of people that might know us already for being able to share all the real information about the fashion industry. That's something that sometimes I think that we are relying a lot is on the bad message, on the bad side of fashion, not the bright one, but communicating all the negativities, which I'm not going to say that it's bad, it's good, but sometimes it depends on the channel that you're using for that. We need to think about it too. When people go to social media, sometimes they don't want to go and find more drama. Maybe they want to go there and just have peace of mind for a while. So why don't we try to change that message that we are sharing with these people to create an awareness in a way that it's more positive, trying to reflect the positivity of, let's say, upcycling, uniqueness, creativity, artsy, something different, try to bring up all the positive things that sustainable fashion can do, instead of relying on the bad things that fast fashion brands are doing, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. Marcellus, do you have any thoughts on what everyone's been saying about, performativity in terms of, activism and, social causes, diversity, inclusion,
Oh,
sustainability?
definitely. Thank you for asking me that question. Well, first I want to say this. Number one, last year I had a photographer. I was on a conference with Jessica Michaud, who's now deputy editor at Vogue Arabia, And we had this weekly clubhouse thing. And so, and we would talk about fashion topics with Sophia Celeste from Milan. And someone asked me once, well, Marcellus, can you give me some ideas as it was a photographer? Can you give me an idea as to what I can do to improve my work and to make my work a bit more inclusive? And I said, well, yes, it's very simple response to that. You're a photographer. If you want to do something, go out into the world, look at the actual world that you're trying to appeal to. Make your photography look like the people in that world. That's a very simple way to start. But number two, I teach sociology at the Sorbonne, right? And the thing is, what we did with my students, so I had an amazing time explaining things to my students, and I was able to fall back onto my experiences, my more than 20 years in the fashion industry, and get people to understand things, right? What we need to understand is this: we cannot count upon profit oriented companies and enterprises to do the right thing every time because it is the right thing to do. And we have companies out there that say they want to change the world for the better. But then when it comes to a conflict of what is right and what is profitable, we only have to look to examples of companies like Facebook and what Mark Zuckerberg has been doing, right? So we know that companies like that are always going to choose profits over what is right. So when we take that and we apply it to what is actually happening in the world, last year, I remember when the Black Lives Matter started last year, and there was, a couple of broken windows here and there in New York, and Virgil Abloh, he decided to post on his Instagram or Twitter or whatever, he decided to post a message, like where he was voicing dissatisfaction with the people who may have broken windows or the moment. Juxtapose that against what his predecessor, Mark Jacobs, did. Mark Jacobs said, who cares about a couple of broken windows? We're talking about people out in the street trying to change the world because a man was murdered, right? So here we have this very big juxtaposition here in opposition in philosophies about the industry. So of course, me, I was like, okay, wow, Mark Jacobs did something that was really important. And this is something that young people are really going to listen to. And I want people to understand this right here and right now. Change does not always have to come from the top. It can come from the streets, as we have seen fashion movements, changes in art and culture. They have all started, many of them have started from the street. And it's only the fashion industry at the very top that has caught on to it and commercialized it. But these changes are changes that come from the people. And what I love about the millennial generation, because last year, after we first started opening up after the first COVID shutdown in Europe, I did a lecture on fashion in a post-COVID world. I did this lecture in Moscow, and one of the things that I pointed out to them, which speaks to this very question here, is this: millennials and Generation Z people are amazing. To me, they are the best generation because these are people who are so passionate. They're thinking about the world, they're thinking about the environment, they're thinking about how we can all live better. And those are the people who are holding the feet of these enterprises to the fire. They are the ones responsible for this consciousness, this awakening of consciousness, right? And I don't think it's really an awakening because I think
Thank
these
you.
companies, they've always known about it. They just didn't do anything about it. Look at young activists like Greta Thunberg, right? These are the people who are pushing the envelope for, and they're telling people like us, we adults, what you guys are doing is not enough. You know better, you can do better, and you're the ones in the position to make the decisions. But we are the ones who are going to hold your feet to the fire about this. So I'm in love with this generation. I don't know, Marielle, Karine, Dan, what do you guys think about this?
I'm a millennial, so thank you. First of all, and to be honest, something that I want to share is that being in a position of power in the company that I co-founded, you said before that companies usually they go to profit, maybe it's my fault in our case that we are not profiting enough because what we are trying to do is things right, and we don't do any kind of collaboration. We don't do anything without being sure that what we are providing to the industry, in this case hospitality, it's correct, it's sustainable, and it's ethical. Otherwise there is no way to go, because both of the co-founders, we are millennials. We both believe in environment, society as flag for be able to maintain the world that we live in, and cultures and everything. So that's basic for us. So I would never feel comfortable collaborating or working with a company that does not have the same standards as I do. I have some influence online. Let's say I have 30,000 something thousand followers, and which is great. And I had a lot of opportunities to make money. I will never work for brands that I'm not going to mention here because they don't deserve to be mentioned. And you know which brands I'm talking about. Even if you pay me a lot of money, I'm not going to work for you. I mean, are we crazy? I have values and I have some principles that I follow. So for me, it wouldn't be the T to do that. So yeah, I completely agree. And for example, in the case of Greta Thunberg, she just, which was great, and I think this is part of performativity and doing a publicity stunt, is creating this call line so adults can call her in case they want to complain about what she does and everything. She just launched that, and it was, I mean, I love when viral things like this in Twitter, Instagram start to grow, because I love to be a little bit sassy with people that are not like 100% committed to the cause, or that they are trying to greenwash. So yeah, some people might say that I came here to stir the pot. I don't care. I only try to bring out my message, and I try to make people that thinks the way I do, the things are as they really are, you know? So yeah, that's a real importance of what I say myself.
I think that's really interesting what you guys, everyone was saying, especially about when brands do try and be more, I guess, like more activist. Quite a few outfits where they had, activist undertones or overtones being more obvious. For instance, Cara Delevingne in the patriarchy corset, or especially for the U.S. Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, the tax the rich dress. So for those type of fashion activist collaborations, because there was quite a lot of backlash where it seemed, again, performative or insincere, or the context wasn't authentic. So what are your thoughts on that?
If I can go on that, first of all, I don't care that something is performative as long as we get the message out. There is a fabulous drag queen called Patagonia, which stands for environmentalism, and she is amazing. I do drag also, as you can see there, and even though it's not public yet, I do it through a perspective of environmentalism statements. So I like it. I didn't care. I loved it. I loved what the AOC did, but this is not the problem. The problem that I have is the background of the designer and what happened afterwards. You know, when you do something like that, there are a lot of BIPOC people that are actually in the situation to be able to deliver that message, and maybe not a designer that already has a second property in Hollywood Hill and has to pay a couple of $100,000 maybe to the state. So the option of the designer could have been better. Yes, the action, I think it's perfect. Why she cannot go to the Met Gala? She was invited, first of all. Why do you care the price of the ticket of that place when what she's gonna do is going to arrive to a lot of people? What do we want? Create awareness, or just complain about things without doing anything? It's it's this shock between people inside of the same thing that we're doing, that we're trying to improve and move forward sustainability, that argue between each other in all those things. And I found it so basic that my opinion is that what she did was great. The choice of words was great. Tax the rich, that's perfect. Maybe the delivery, from the person that actually designed it was not the correct one. But anyways, I'm no one to put anything on anyone. So sorry for the designer. I didn't mean to offend her, but I mean, let's face it and do things that we should.
I agree with you on that particular point, Dan. Now, I'm no huge fan of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, okay? My politics are a bit more conservative than hers, but we are in complete agreement on this thing about taxing the rich, for example, because we live in a world in which these rich people, these titans of industry, they are the ones who are more responsible for polluting our world and for causing a lot of these problems, and yet they refuse to do something about it, right? So when I saw the dress, tax to it, I had no problem with it, right? Yeah, it was
I
just a distraction. That was all. And
Mm,
I think that Marielle was absolutely right.
mm,
When Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez was first elected to Congress, she campaigned on these types of things, right? Since
mm.
she has been in Congress, she has been exceptionally, perhaps one of the most consistent, along with Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren, about these same things.
and just one more thing. Just to let's say add or improve a little bit the action that she did was like, I mean, we're going to the Met Gala, we know it by fashion also, so why don't we show a little bit of upcycling there, like trying to really show the message, not just that and the social implication of fashion, but all in this case, but also the environmental one, like try to bring a message and something that actually shows a little bit more. Let's say, I don't know, you've been to RuPaul's Drag Race, get some inspiration from there, so that's something also that has to be, taken into account when we have these opportunities. And I agree with what Marielle said, that there were other strikes and voices going on out there, and unfortunately, they didn't have the same mediatic coverage. So what I'm meaning with this is not that I agree that they should have less mediatic coverage, but what I mean with that is that the message that the AOC, sorry, the name is long, was trying to put forward was actually, it's going to actually get to people that are not even aware of sustainability issues in the fashion industry. Even though it's been talked for a long time, I swear there's still people that don't care because don't know because stuff. So for me this is also something really important, how we deliver this message, and that's why I agree the way that she, even though improvements, I agree with the way that she did in the place that she did. And yeah, okay, I mean, you're gonna get a backlash at the end of the day for everything that you do. You're not gonna be liked by everybody. So
Mhm.
I'm sure that the ones that starting all this backlash was the people that was directly against her. So, I mean, it was a political movement, actually. So I don't even care. Sorry.
No, everyone has been saying such interesting points on this dress, and well, because I see we're a little bit over, because I've been very enthralled in everyone's conversations. But I guess to wrap everything up,
Yes.
we've been talking about performativity, uh, backlash to when uh, activism and fashion does meet in in the spotlight, in the media spotlight. So as fashion has become more activist, especially since last year with COVID and Black Lives Matter and everything that's been going on, how do you feel we can transition from cancel culture, backlash, performativity into accountability, or to a place where we can be productive with everything?
I don't
I
mind.
say, please go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, thank you. I think there's an important space here around us recognizing the simplicity of cancel culture and the complexity of human beings. We're all flawed. We've all got a lot to learn, and difficult conversations need to be had. And kind of walking away from the conversation or that person as if they don't exist is not going to work. For me, I've been helped to learn and to see things by other people explaining their position. And I would always want to have a conversation. I'd want to have the difficult conversation with someone who was directly in opposition to me, to learn what it was I wasn't seeing from their perspective. I had an example yesterday in one of my lectures where I was specifically talking around white centricity, white denial, and a student in the break didn't return and had texted everybody that there was no such thing as white supremacy. I wish we could have had that conversation in the room with just an understanding of where his knowledge was coming from. You know, as an educator, for me, a big part of what I want to understand is why do you hold on to that idea? Is it through fear? Is it through struggling to, you know, we don't have to have the answers all the time. I think people think that if they say, you know, I'm coming back to the gut and emotions, this doesn't feel right, how do we go forward? How do we sort of gather intelligence? There's a collaborative aspect to it all. We all need to be moving forward and encouraging each other to speak our truth, to work out what the bottom line is. To your point, Marcellus, you know, there is always a bottom line that motivates people. And so I find cancel culture in and of itself reactive. There's no thought behind it, and responsive, where you've had time to think, would always be my chosen path.
Well, on the question of council culture, I am far less liberal than most people would think I am, right? But and I hear a lot of conservatives out there always complaining about council culture and stuff, you know, when it suits them well. But I'm going to say this: I personally am not against council culture in certain instances, because there are people out there who have platforms and they are dangerous and they do harm and they should be silenced. We should, on the other side of that, we should work to understand why these people are dangerous and why they should not have a platform. And so I do believe, so I'm not against, I don't think that council culture is an absolute evil when it serves the greater good. Because we done this council culture in terms of certain social media, then perhaps a certain event that took place on January 6th in the United States would not have occurred.
And then did anyone have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think often this suggestion of cancel culture is a way to humanize people that are harmful in positions of power. And I'm not sure if it's really cancel culture or asking for collective accountability and asking for clear, actionable steps of responsibility at often the expense of giving up their power or their positions in a company to give space for someone that either deserves it more or someone that would be more responsible in those positions. And so I'm always really skeptical of the term cancel culture. I think it's very much being used by right-wing politicians predominantly as a way of saying, like, well, we can't cancel everything. And I think that in doing so, we are upholding a status quo that more often than not serves white people. And so I don't really have an issue with cancel culture. I also would challenge, like, I don't know who has been canceled and like canceled in a finite way. If you look at even, you know, the Me Too movement, most of the men that did extremely egregious things still have most of their careers or have attempted comebacks or still have followings. Like I don't know at what point something goes from cancel culture to accountability, but I think more often than not, what people are asking for is accountability. The difference is the number of people asking for it is a much higher magnitude. And for that, I do have some empathy. I don't think humans are necessarily built to take, hundreds of thousands of people telling you to change in a very violent way. But I think for the most part, cancel culture is asking for accountability of people who have previously not had to be held to any sort of standard or be challenged or change their views, and as a result have continued to perpetrate harm. So I'm not against cancel culture because I don't think it's really that. I think it's people that are finally being held accountable by the public for the first time. And to them, it feels like a violent act. And in reality, it's a level of accountability that we've never had before because we've never had the means to hold people in incredibly high positions accountable.
What
I'm applauding you, Maria, because I love what you just said here. You said it more eloquently than I do. Clearly, you have more patience for the subject than I, but it's just that we've all been subjected this past year and a half to just a lot of tomfoolery, everywhere we go. And it's always amazing when I hear people say, well, I'm being counseled, they're trying to counsel me. And it's particularly when they like to use this line, I've been silenced. And I'm like, but you say you've been silenced while at the same time you're saying this at a press conference with journalists. So how have you been silenced? You can't have it both ways. You cannot hold a press conference with journalists while at the same time crying victim. I'm gonna end on this point where Mario was saying about like these acts that people have been doing and stuff, because you had other people crying wolf playing the victim card like Bill Cosby, you had Jeffrey Epstein, and you also had Harvey Weinstein also playing this thing about, like I'm being counseled and playing the victim card. But look how long it took to bring them to accountability. This is not something that was one person. This is not something that was a second person or a third person or a fourth, even fifth. We're talking about dozens of women who had these accusations, who had these complaints. But look how long it took to bring them to accountability. Things that were happening in the 80s and 90s up until the last several years, right? Before they were actually brought in to say, hey, you've got to answer for what you've done. Look at Kevin Spacey, right? So thank you, Mario, for having the patience to add more words to it and stuff. But like I said, I've just seen so much that I don't have time to be more accommodating to people who want to have it both ways while doing harm to other people.
well, I want to.
Well, sorry. I'm just going to say one thing really quick, Dan. I think one of the ways in which cancel culture is being suggested is that if any nice, good person makes one small misstep, that's it. Their career is over. And it's just that's not true at all. That's this myth that we are pushing forward as a way to let people that have had entirely toxic careers, as Marcellus has just said, to feel safe in continuing to harm people. And so I think that, to me, that's my biggest frustration with cancel culture, is this idea that you say one wrong thing and that's it. You're canceled forever. And it's no, that's not what cancel culture is calling for. And I think that it's a myth that is used to make everyone feel like at any moment they could be in endless amounts of trouble, when it's no, these are people that caused harm for literally decades to dozens of people. I completely agree. It's not an accident. And also, I would say that if you say something harmful or you do something harmful as, a person that makes a mistake, yeah, you should be held accountable for that and be given the opportunity to do better and learn. But there's a big difference between a person that is working through their own racism. As a white person, I will forever be doing that work because I was raised in a racist culture. And yeah, it's just, it's so frustrating to skew it that way, because I think it also then takes away the onus on people that do make genuine mistakes, that yeah, but you still made a mistake and you're still accountable for that. You still have to hold yourself to learn and fix it and repair and make amends for that harm and help prevent other people from making that same mistake. It's accountability, but we've blown it into this concept that at any moment everything could be taken from you, instead of viewing it as we all are supposed to be doing anti-racism work all the time as I say this all as in white people, which means we are going to make mistakes, and then we are going to be held accountable for those mistakes, and we're going to have to keep learning and keep trying and keep showing up. And this idea of cancel culture, it makes it so as a white person, you're like, well, there's nothing I could ever do right, so I can't even bother trying. And it's like, no, you have to keep showing up. But people that are getting quote unquote canceled are people that like, they aren't trying, they aren't making a small mistake. They are abusers and people that are causing just magnitudes of harm in our culture. And that's accountability.
I think that we're talking about three different terms right now, which is the call out culture, the cancel culture, and being accountable of the actions that you're doing. And let's say an example, as you precisely said, someone that does something that it's wrong for the first time, genuinely not knowingly or not knowing the impact of that action, cannot be canceled and cannot be treated at the same level as a person that has been harming for a long time. Not the person, company, for example, is not the same. Then accountability also obviously has to be applied to both cases. But I think it's not the same. It's not the same, and I think that we need to have that really clear when we are talking about cancel culture. It's about something that, as has been said, has a really huge negative impact somehow. Like it's widely known, and that person or company is reincident, we say in English, like it's repeating those negative actions again and trying to avoid the negative impact that they're going to have just because of that. So that was my point. So for me, I think that we have to really separate between the calling out culture, which I think should be okay, and it's okay, the cancel culture that should be only applied in specific cases, and accountability that actually applies to everything. If you do something wrong, you take care of that, you fix the problem. So.
Yeah, I do agree with Dan. Like, I feel like, yeah, because cancel culture is such a umbrella term nowadays. Because I also agree with Marielle that people are assuming cancel culture is just canceling forever and not seeing it as highlighting, an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to, be responsible for owning up to your mistakes. Yeah, so I guess that was the last question. And we had such a great conversation. I've been just so enthralled with everyone's point of view and everyone's, uh, you know, everyone here in this talk is in such an influential position and has such interesting insights into this topic. And I just wanted to first off to thank everyone for the work that you have done and the work that you will do and the opportunities that you will be giving to people, who aren't in the spotlight or who aren't seen. So again, yeah, thank you again for that. Yeah, so I guess that will be the end of the talk. I wish I could do more because I could listen to everyone all day long. But yeah, again, thank you again for being at this talk regarding fashion activism and being part of the Festival for Fashion Minority Alliance.
Thanks to you, Kamei.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and it was a pleasure to meet you and re-meet you again.
Thank you, everyone.